Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if a smile is just a smile or if there is more going on behind those rosy cheeks? Well, today we're diving into a fascinating study that explores how we understand different types of smiles and what actually makes them easier or harder to recognize. So the big question this research wanted to answer is this. When we see someone smile, how much does what we think we know about smiles actually help us figure out what kind of smile it is? Are we paying attention to how the smile looks on their face, or more about why they might be smiling in the first place? And does it matter if we see the smile move, or just in a frozen picture? The scientists in this study looked at 3 specific types of smiles, kind of like a framework called the Sims model. There are reward smiles, which are basically when someone is genuinely happy or pleased. Then there are affiliative smiles, which are more about being polite, showing you are friendly and trying to build connections with others. And finally, there are dominant smiles, which are used to show you are superior or in charge. Now, normally, when we think about understanding smiles, we might think it's all about the visual cues, right? Like how the mouth curves up or if the eyes crinkle. These are the morphological aspects, basically what the smile looks like in terms of muscles moving. But scientists also know that we have Socio-Functional knowledge, that's our understanding of why someone might be smiling, like to be friendly or to show they're happy. This study wanted to see which of these 2 types of knowledge is more important for correctly identifying these different kinds of smiles. So how did they test this? In study 1, they gathered about 200 people in Poland. They split these people into 2 groups. One group read definitions of the reward, affiliative, and dominant smiles that focused on their social functions, why they are used. The other group read definitions that describe the morphological aspects, how the muscles move. What the face looks like. Think of it like this. One group learned why a smile happens, the other learned how it happens physically. After reading these definitions, the participants then watched videos or looked at still pictures of people smiling. These smiles were designed to represent the reward, affiliative, and dominance types. And here is another twist. Some participants saw the smiles as short video clips, dynamic, and others saw them as single frozen images, static. After seeing each smile, the participants had to rate how much they thought it was a reward, affiliative, or dominant smile. The researchers then looked at how accurately they could categorize each type of smile based on which definitions they had read, and whether they saw dynamic or static images. And here is where it gets really interesting. Their first big finding, and it was a surprise, was that participants who read the morphological definitions, the ones describing how the smile looks, were actually much better at correctly identifying the smiles than those who read the functional definitions, the ones describing why the smile is used. This goes against the initial idea that understanding the social function would be key. It was like knowing the physical details of the smile helped more than knowing its purpose. They also found that, as expected, dynamic smiles, the videos, were generally easier to categorize than static ones, the photos. This makes sense because seeing the movement gives you more information. So, study 1 suggested that the physical description of a smile is more helpful for recognizing different types of smiles than understanding its social function. But there was a catch. The researchers noticed that in the morphological group, they used the actual names of the smiles, like reward smile, affiliative smile, and dominant smile. These names themselves hint at the function, so maybe the participants in the morphological group got a double dose of information, the physical description and clues from the name. This made the researchers wonder if the morphological advantage was truly from the physical descriptions alone. To fix this, they ran study 2 with about 200 people in the UK, aiming to replicate their findings and address that naming issue. This time, they came up with new names for the smiles that were purely descriptive of their appearance. For example, instead of reward smile, they used squint smile, and they made sure these new morphological names were paired only with the morphological definitions. The functional group still got the old functional definitions with their functional names. And guess what? They found the same thing. Even with purely morphological names, the people who learned the physical descriptions were still better at categorizing the smiles than those who learned the social functions. This was a much stronger piece of evidence that focusing on the appearance of the smile is really important for identifying these specific types. The results for dynamic versus static smiles got a little more complicated here. While dynamic was still generally better, the effect wasn't as straightforward as in study 1. For example, they found that for reward smiles, when people learned the morphological definition, seeing a static picture was actually better than seeing the video. This was a surprising finding. The researchers suggest that maybe for a very clear, prototypical smile like a reward smile, seeing it at its peak in a still image for a good amount of time might be more informative than watching it develop in a video. To be extra sure, they ran study 3 with an even larger group, about 265 people, again in the UK, to replicate these complex findings, especially the unexpected static advantage for reward smiles under morphological definitions. And again, the main finding held strong. Participants who read morphological definitions, how the smile looks, were significantly better at categorizing the smiles than those who read functional definitions, why the smile is used. This was consistent across all 3 studies. It seems like knowing the physical features of these nuanced smiles is key for accurate identification. The pattern for dynamic versus static presentation was also interesting. They found that affiliative smiles were better recognized in dynamic form, which fits with earlier research. But reward smiles again seemed to be recognized better in static form, especially when people had learned the morphological definition. This reinforces the idea that for very clear, intense smiles, a static image might be enough, or even better if you are focusing on the specific muscle movements. So, what does this all mean? The most significant finding from this whole project is that understanding how a smile looks, its physical characteristics, seems to be more important for accurately identifying reward, affiliative, and dominant smiles than understanding why people smile. This is a bit of a surprise because the Sims model itself was originally based on social functions. Why might this be? The researchers suggest that morphological details are more concrete and objective. The functional definitions, while useful, might be a bit more abstract or prone to individual interpretation, especially when the social situations are not clearly described. For these specific, nuanced smiles, the physical cues might be the most reliable. An interesting point is that the morphological definitions were actually harder for people to learn. This suggests they might not be our default way of thinking about smiles. However, when people did put in the effort to learn them, their accuracy went up. This could be because learning these details forced people into a more analytical step-by-step way of processing the faces, rather than just going with a gut feeling. The role of dynamic versus static presentation was more complex than a simple videos are always better story. It seems to depend on the type of smile and what information you are focusing on. For ambiguous smiles, motion might help, but for very clear, intense smiles, a static image might be just as good or even better, especially if you are focusing on specific facial features. Something else that came up in their exploratory analysis was how the gender of the person smiling affected things. Across the studies, it seemed like affiliative smiles were recognized better on men's faces, and dominant smiles were recognized better on women's faces. The researchers think this might be because these smiles go against common gender stereotypes. When we see something unexpected, it might grab our attention more, making it easier to categorize. Now, like any study, there are limitations. The smiles were mostly shown without much real-life context, which is important for understanding social interactions. Future research could explore how these different ways of thinking about smiles play out in more natural settings. Also, they only looked at categorization accuracy, not how quickly people could do it. Measuring response times could give us more insight into how fast and efficiently people are processing these smiles. And finally, they mentioned that future studies could look at things like facial mimicry, whether we unconsciously copy the smiles we see. This might be more important when we're focusing on morphological cues. So, to wrap it up, this research gives us a really interesting look into how we understand smiles. It strongly suggests that when it comes to distinguishing between different types of smiles like reward, affiliative, and dominance, knowing the physical details of how the smile looks is actually more powerful than knowing its social purpose. And the way we see the smile, whether moving or still, also plays a role, but it is a bit more complicated than we might think. It's a great reminder that sometimes the devil is in the details, or in this case, the accuracy is in the articulation. What do you guys think? Does this resonate with your own experiences? Do you find yourself paying more attention to the muscles moving or the social context when you see a smile? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.